So he was called righteous before the circumcision. The circumcision then is a sign between the physical descendants of Abraham and God. Am I a physical descendant of Abraham?
Yeah.
No, I'm a spiritual descendant of Abraham. I am grafted into the family of faith by faith in Jesus Christ. I'm not a physical descendant of Abraham.
We're all descendants. Everyone's a descendant. No.
No.
Not Abraham.
No.
Noah.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not a physical descendant of Abraham through the promised seed, which is Isaac. Okay. So do you see, you really have to do a lengthy study on this to understand why it's not necessary for Charlie Garrett in a New Testament church to be circumcised. Like I said, whether I am or not makes no difference. If my mom and dad did it for health reasons, great. If they didn't, I don't need to feel obligated to have this done to me. Okay? I am not a physical descendant of Abraham through Isaac, through Jacob, through, on down the line. Anyway, okay, so that's what's going on here. And, I won't get into it, but it's such a source of disagreement with some people that they will read the book of Galatians and still think that you have to not eat certain foods, still have to be circumcised. All these things, when Paul, he could not be clearer. Now, all we did was read a couple verses out of there, but I'm telling you, if you read the book of Galatians and come to any other conclusion than that we are not under the law, I have no help for you at all. None, I honestly don't. And I had a lady that emailed me. My husband is Jewish, and I did just an analysis of the book of Galatians, kind of like what do you call it when you make point after point? There's a term they use. No,
affirmation.
No. Well, like a synopsis, but what I'm looking for is if you were going into... Anyway, it's just point by point, real quickly, and it basically repeats what Paul says. I mean, that's all it does. It just, But she came on and she said, well, you've come to entirely the wrong conclusion. My husband is Jewish, as if that has anything to do with it at all. That's just completely irrelevant to what Paul is writing. And, we talked for a while and finally said, you know what, you're just wrong, and I got no help for you. And that's what I told her. If you come to a different conclusion in the book of Galatians, there is really something wrong. Because Paul, there are some things in the Bible, admittedly, that are very difficult, but the book of Galatians is not. It is so clear. I love it because it's so simple, and he just makes logical point after logical point right down to the end of the book.
That'd be a good Sunday class for you.
Oh yeah, I'm telling you what. The two books I would recommend to everybody that wants to know doctrine in the church would be the book of Romans and the book of Hebrews. Those two, I'd read them at least 8 times in a row. Just read it, go back and read it again and again. And then after that, I would recommend the book of Galatians, just for that purpose. Then all of the other books fulfill certain purposes. But the doctrine in the church, read Romans, just read it every single day for 2 weeks, and then the book of Hebrews, because that will tell you about the priestly role of Christ and his superiority over Moses, over the angels, over this, over that. And so those 2 books really are great bookends in Paul's writings, if Paul wrote Hebrews, which we don't know. And then Galatians is just... It will really help you solidify what you've just read in those other 2 books. Anyway, there you go. So I'm not sure where we were. This is my covenant, foreskins. Verse 12, go ahead.
And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. The servant who is born in the house, or who has bought with money from any foreigner, who is not of your descendants. The servant who is born in your house, or who is bought with your money, shall surely be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant.
Okay, so this is everybody born in the household, servants and children alike. He's saying all of you do it. Now, they weren't really faithful with this throughout the time all the way up until going into Canaan. And we know that because when the Israelites entered the land of Canaan after the 40 years of being in the wilderness, they have a place called, I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, it's called the Hill of the Foreskins. They were all circumcised once they went into the land of Canaan. So they weren't faithful about the 8-day thing. Moses didn't have his 2 sons circumcised. I mean, he had them out in Midian. But anyway, it wasn't something like, you often will read or hear somebody talking about how careful they were about these things, and you just kind of hear these things like in sermons and stuff, and they really weren't. They were not careful about this really until they got into the land of Israel. Okay, there were just times where the people were not faithful with following this covenant. But the Lord was ever good to them and ever merciful. So anyway, whatever. Go ahead, verse 14, I guess it was.
But an uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant.
The term cut off from his people can mean be put to death. Okay, I don't know if it always means that. I've heard, anytime you read that, it means put him to death. But it could be that you just kick him out of the covenant people of Israel, tell him to go away. I don't know. I'm not trying to say one way or another. I just don't know. But I have read some people comment that anytime you see the term be cut off from his people, that he should be put to death. Whereas I just don't read it that way. When I'm reading it, there are times where it says put him to death. There's times when it says he shall be cut off from his people, and then there are times where it'll say both in one sentence. So
it's a separation any way you look at it.
Right, well, that's right.
It's a pretty serious thing to
Yeah, it is.
Right.
like go away and not be found.
It's very serious. And you're going to read that a lot in the book of Leviticus and Numbers probably. You're going to see that this term is used quite a bit. But like I said, sometimes it says just cut off from his people. Sometimes it says this person surely must be stoned or must be put to death or whatever. And then once or twice it says both of them in one sentence. And so I'm not dogmatic about being cut off from your people meaning be put to death. I just... if that's what it means, that's what it means. But I'm just trying to give you the information there. Anyway, go ahead.
Then God said to Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Okay,
so he's changed her name as well. I believe it's adding in exactly the same letter, a hey. I can't be certain about that, but I believe it is. And Sarah means princess. So, and he said that yesterday in the sermon. God said to Abraham, Sarah, your wife, he renamed her himself. And I will bless her and also give you a son by her. There we have the promise right there that what happened with Hagar was not what was intended, and that, obviously Ishmael is not the person that is going to receive the blessing. We're going to see that right now. Hang on, where were we? Bless her and also give you a son by her, and I will bless her. Yep, right, hang on a sec. And she will be a mother of nations, kings of people shall be from her. Mother of nations, father of nations, okay?
Yeah.
See that? All right, go ahead, verse 17.
Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? See here, they're saying that they're beyond that.
Right. Well, we would do the same thing with that lady in India today, 65. And same thing with, what's his name in the temple? Zechariah and his wife.
They specifically are they not?
They're what?
He is saying specifically that...
Well, sure, and of course this is miraculous. We know that. What I'm saying is that, is it impossible based on what she said? And the people are living much, much older. He is saying, yeah, think of it this way. Forget the age. Think of it this way. He's been married to this woman now for how long?
Yeah.
And they haven't had a child,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. Forget the age part of it. It's miraculous simply because unless they never came together as husband and wife for the past 70 years, you know what I mean? To me, what's miraculous is the fact that it finally came about, right? They're old, yes, but by those standards, were they really old? And the fact is, when he says, what does he say right here? This is what confirms it with me, because it just came to mind, but I've thought this before. It says, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Does a man's age have anything to do with conceiving a child? No, nothing. It has nothing to do with it. Men now that are 100 years old can have children. What was that guy? Tony Randall had one with a 20-year-old girl a couple years ago. Remember the guy, the comedian, Tony Randall? And he had this real young wife. A man has nothing. He, until the day he dies, as a matter of fact, the terminology used when they buried Moses, I have heard that it says he was not diminished in strength was referring to his ability to procreate. So in other words, he didn't need Viagra, right? But what he is saying here has really irrelevant to the age of the people as it is, I think, to how long they were together. If he had just simply said her, she's 90 years old, but like I said, we would say the same thing about that lady over in India that had, and I think she was older than 60. I mean, she was an old lady.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
She was older.
Maybe in her 80s. I mean, she was really an old lady. Might have been in her 80s. It was definitely an older lady. But you see my logic there is that because he includes his age, which is irrelevant to the child-making process, I think the miracle is just that it's finally happening after all these years. Just like Zechariah, his wife, and whoever else. Rebecca, same thing, had a hard time having children. They've been trying. You can infer that from what it says, and yet finally they had children. So the miracle is that they are having children, to me, not the age of them.
Did it say later that she was past the age of...
Past the age, right, and so is the lady over in India. That it is something that is older, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible, right? That's just how I'm... Go ahead.
I just think that this happened when it did, so that they really knew this was God.
Absolutely. That's absolutely, and that's the way it is through the whole Bible. They are certain.
Much earlier, they wouldn't have given the glory to God that they're going to give.
Right. And it proves that this is the Son of promise. I mean, the whole thing just smacks of God's intervention. The whole thing. Regardless of age, regardless of how long they've been married or whatever, the whole thing is just God's intervention in here. So, anyway, go ahead.
And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you."
So he's asking for the blessing on his son. Obviously, he loves the boy. It's his son. And he had it in the way that was accepted in society, but, okay, go ahead.
But God said, "No, but Sarah your wife will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him."
Okay, does anybody have it say something different than no? Yes. See? Her says yes. The word is lo in Hebrew. I'm absolutely certain of that. Hang on. The word no. No, hang on one second here. This is Genesis 17. Genesis 17.
Your wife will bear you.
Yes, but your wife.
Now, why would they put that in there? Why would they say yes?
Well, because he was blessed.
That's right. It says here.
Yes, but though. It's one of those things to get, like when you ask someone a question, they say yes, but.
Hang on one second. Okay, it doesn't say lo. It says, truly Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. Okay, the word there is aval. Okay, so
Spell it, please.
Spell what?
The word that's there.
Oh, in Hebrew, it would be A-V-A-L, I guess, aval, or E-V-A-L, eval, or, yeah, probably aval. Anyway, it's Aleph, Bet, Lamed. And anyway, so that's the word that's in there. It doesn't say lo, which is no, and it doesn't say ken, which is yes. But I would go with the yes simply because you could look at it one of two ways. You could look at it one of two ways. You could say, no, this isn't what I'm talking about, God saying that. Or you could say, yes, he will be blessed, but because he promised to bless him back, remember your son? Okay, so I don't think either one is wrong. It just depends on how you read that particular verse to make sure that God's intent is what is.
Yeah, he's telling Abraham.
Right.
He's telling Abraham, you don't have it right. This is what I'm telling you. This is the way it's
Right.
going to be.
Yes, he will be blessed, though. That translation is not incorrect. Or no, you've missed what I'm saying. You see how yes or no could be used because it's not using the word lo. Okay? And
Well, yes, but it's just not, even today, is not a definitive answer. That's the.
well, that's right. That's why we need the clarification in there. And the context is that Isaac is the son of promise. Now, before we go on, who else was the son of promise before Isaac? Or who received the blessing, we'll say, before, what I'm trying to get at is let's go back and look at the patterns that have been set, and we'll do this again as we go through the Bible. Second son. Who is the second son that replaced the first?
Seth?
Well, Seth, because Abel was killed, but Abel was the second son, and God looked favorably on his offering. Okay, then after that, who's another second son?